Hello, my name is Marie Helena Carey, and I write a blog called The Hillism. And today I am with Julie. Go ahead, Julie, introduce yourself.
Hi, my name's Julie Aronson. I'm the Executive Director of CHAMPS, the Capitol Hill Chamber of Commerce, here on Capitol Hill.
Okay, and we have been interviewing at-large candidates, and today we are with Claudia Barragan. Claudia, please introduce yourself.
Sure. My name is Claudia Barragan. I am running for at-large council. My platform is basically equity, diversity, and action. I'm originally from Bolivia, South America, so the diversity part is definitely there in terms of what is missing in council currently. But also, I'm also running as an urban planner, so diversity and skill sets. And that's a very important thing. I have 20 years of experience in urban planning and development here in the district, and I bring a special set of skill sets that no other candidate nor council member currently has. I was also just in council for the last 2 years, serving as a policy analyst for Councilmember Trayon White, serving the Great Ward 8. So I bring that experience from inside, and that's one of the reasons why I decided to run, because I definitely saw needs. Finally, like I mentioned, action is a really big part of what I do, and I have, unlike other candidates, I have about 40 bills in my pocket that I have worked on, drafted, advocated for, fought for many times, 28 of which became law. 6 of them are under current council review. So those are pretty good numbers in my opinion, especially for an immigrant who's, English is not her native language, my native language. Finally, equitable development. I'm an expert in equitable development, specifically looking at displacement prevention policies. A lot of the work in those 40 bills are all around equity. So yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Okay, well, thank you so much. So without further ado, I'll go ahead and get started. I will ask 3 questions. I will ask 2 at first, and then Julie will ask 3, and I will close off with 1. So my first question is, in such a crowded field of candidates, how do you plan on standing out? I think you mentioned a few of the things that make you unique in your introduction, but in a field with so many at-large candidates, and there are some well-known names among those, how do you plan on standing out, and do you think that those known names have an unfair advantage?
Definitely. So like I mentioned, because I'm an urban planner, I bring a completely different set of professional skill sets, especially around technical analysis and evidence-based analysis. So I'm a data geek, and I know all of the candidates, because when you do community work, and I've been doing community advocacy work pro bono on my own. I actually started my social enterprise about 2 years ago. People know me, especially because immigrants don't have a voice. We're seldom in the shadows. So when someone like me, an immigrant from Bolivia, indigenous, Aymara, woman, with an urban planning background, I stand out. And what's really sad though right now, because we have so many people running, is that the city has basically been giving 2 choices. You either go for the establishment or for progressive candidates. This particular position seat that we're looking for is an independent seat. And I really fit that independent motto. Even though I was a Democrat before, I now completely have changed to be an independent, because I feel like we need more critical thinkers. We're giving the residents only 2 choices, and we need a 3rd option many times. And most of that is on finding the things that we agree on, not this polarization. And I think that the candidates that are currently at the top and that are getting all of the attention are feeding that polarization. And people like me who have been doing work next to them for a very long time, and they're all male, by the way, we stand in their shadow, and a lot of the times they're using our own platforms, our own work as like calling it themselves. Like equitable development is something that urban planners of color in the district have fought for. I did that fight single-handedly. The only support I had was from Councilmember Trey White in the entire city, 700K people. People were not doing that work. But it saddens me to hear a lot of these candidates, and not just the top three, but everybody else, talk about equitable development as if they know what it means. And it's, you know, it's not a trendy word, and I think that's one of those things that distinguishes me from everyone else. But because I can explain those things, I can show the results in the bills that I have included. So yeah.
Okay, so, you know, just my next question, I think, follows what you were saying. Each ward council office handles in the business inside their geographic area, but often the at-large seat is kind of a backup, or seen as a backup, you know, just kind of whenever you're not getting the results you want from your council member, you appeal to the at-large seat. And how would you raise the profile of the at-large office so people can feel like you are there for all Washingtonians, and that they may want even to go to you as a first line of defense, not as a backup?
Yeah, that's interesting. Like I mentioned, I worked for 2 years. I just came out of, because of running, out of working in council for Councilmember Trey White in Ward 8. And that's a really interesting word to work and serve for inside council, because that doesn't happen there. Our constituency service director worked overtime, she worked on behalf of 2 constituency service directors. We had at-large council members, staff contacting her to do their work. It was that frustrating. And a lot of Ward 8 residents, they trust who they elected. So they go there first. They don't necessarily go to the at-large council members. And that was one of our big critiques, because we were like, you know, we're doing a lot and we're having to deal with a lot of the disparities in that particular in Ward 8. But all these other at-large council members, they weren't really necessarily pulling their weight on what they should be doing in terms of serving Ward 7 and 8. And even areas in Ward 5 where I live that are also facing all these disparities. So that was a really interesting thing, because from my perspective, that is definitely something that needs to happen. And that's one of the reasons why I'm running as well, because as an immigrant, 20% of our population in the entire city are immigrants, not Latinos, immigrants as a whole. Ethiopian community, the Iranians, you know, Asian community, APIs, everyone combined, we're 20% of the population, yet we've never been included in council decisions nor in representation. And I fought for representation for a long time now. But there's so many similarities in our struggle, right? So by being an at-large council member, I would be able to raise and help that 20% of the population raise their voice and their concerns. And it happens to be that our concerns are exactly the same concerns that other people are facing throughout the city, especially in education. Virtual learning is really impacting us, right? So the solutions that are targeted solutions for at-risk parents and students would impact all of us. It would impact a large group of people in the city. So I feel like that is one of the areas that, you know, like we really need to work on. The other really final thing I would want to say is language access is really important in terms of constituency services, right? In Ward 8, there was a growing immigrant population. Ward 7, it's growing a lot, actually. We're being fragmented. Displacement is definitely there, but we're also, and when I say we immigrants, are also being fragmented throughout the city. You can just see how our parents have to struggle taking their kids from one part of the city to another part of the city to another part of the city because of charter schools. So we are everywhere, but we can't speak to our representatives because they don't speak our language. And that's been something that, you know, like that I want to make sure that there's authentic representation, and also make sure that it's in our language.
Okay, well, thank you. And I guess I should say gracias. I feel like that, you know, just it's nice to hear you say your name properly too, you know, like the little things.
Yeah.
Anyway, I will now turn it over to Julie, who will go ahead and ask her 3 questions.
A common concern of CHAMPS members is that it's hard to do business in DC. Licensing is hard, bureaucracy is slow, the agency databases don't talk to each other. Many small business owners spend hours navigating this DC bureaucracy, and a number of them have told me that they couldn't have started a business if they didn't have a partner who had a full-time job. This hurts the prospective small business owner that is not well resourced. So how would you use your position on the council to make small business ownership easier and more accessible?
Yeah. So another way in which I differentiate from a lot of the candidates in currently running is that I have lived experience. What you just mentioned is basically my experience. Had it not been for my husband, I wouldn't have been able to start my business. We're both architects. We're both in the architecture field. And in 2010, we were both laid off back to back, 1 week after the other. And at the time, we were trying to buy a house. So we had already like put in, you know, like our bid for a house, and we both got laid off. At that time, I realized one of us needs to really diversify. So I went back to school and I focused on environmental policy. So I started my own business in urban planning and development, specifically with environmental justice focus, because I wanted to be my own boss. And it's something that if and when, because it's going to happen, the market crashes again, at least we'll be our own bosses this time. But it's so difficult. It is incredibly difficult. Especially, I mean, if for someone like me to, and I always say, I have a master's degree and I struggle with the CRA, right? If I am struggling at this level and I'm spending months, not even days, months, on trying to figure that out, how are other people doing it? Corporate division, for instance, just the fact that the CRA has 2 different divisions, the business division, business licensing division, and the corporate division, and that they don't talk to each other, and then OTR doesn't talk to any of them. I've had to deal with OTR for 6 months and getting them to process one form. And that delayed me recently in a contract that I was trying to do. And these are contracts. So my business is specifically focused on at-risk communities, right? Frontline communities. So I made, it's a social enterprise. So I made that commitment that I will predominantly help socially disadvantaged communities. So by this delays, it not only delays my work, it delays their need. And it's really important because our impact as business owners is big. I really truly believe that what we need to do is we need to provide more resources that are actionable. Like, I went to so many trainings. I got tired of those trainings and the same people were in those trainings. DSLBD honestly is not doing a great job in providing what we actually need. And we tell them, I have been telling them for 2 years, what is it that we need? We need contacts with accountants. We need lawyers. We need access to legal aid, and then the processing and understanding the process, not necessarily writing a business plan, but it's what do you do once you already have a business plan on the contracts. So all of those things, and marketing is important, but you know, like it's the processes that was needed. And they always come back with, well, we can't do that because we're a government agency. And the question is, then who can? DC Bar Pro Bono, what they've been doing is pretty good. I'm even thinking of expanding now to a co-op. So there have been private nonprofit organizations that have been providing some of that knowledge, but it's always still like, well, we're not legal advisors, so you're gonna have to contact a lawyer. How do you do that? So I think because I know this issue, I'm living it now, and I know how hard it is for small businesses. I have the tools to know what to do in there.
Great, thank you. We're currently in phase 2. And so sales for many of our storefront retailers and restaurants have dropped a dramatic 40, 50%, even more from where they were last year. Fixed costs of taxes and rent are still due. Businesses who have spent their paycheck protection funds already, their DC microgrants, those are gone. Businesses are closing. So if you were on the council right now, what would you do to help our small businesses continue to operate and employ people?
Yes. So at some point, 20 years ago, it's a long time, we started putting really heavy boundaries on our region, especially around DC. Right. Because I grew up in the area, I know the pride that comes, from saying I'm a Moco kid, I'm a DC person, made in DC. Right. This is the time in which we have to focus on our region and the monetary value that's out there. Immigrants, for example, we provide $3 billion worth of sales amount, right? Like power, buying power. But that's not in DC, because in DC we're, like I said, we're 20%, but Latino specifically, we're only 10%. And but when you think about the region, our money is pretty big, and we can help and empower the businesses in DC and even cross work with each other, right? And sharing some of this resources or spaces. Even there's a lack of space in DC for some businesses as well, so you can actually collaborate regionally, because that's what we used to do prior to the gentrification that we have experienced. So I would want to go back to really focusing on the regional aspects of commerce, and work with Prince George County has a lot of space. They have great, wonderful people in there that are trying to do their work. We can collaborate with them. They're just adjacent to us. They're right in the boundary. And also really looking at making sure that there's this pride in the region as buy-in, as a buying power, right? And I think that this is the time that we need to do that. We need to really forget about these boundaries that have been placed for some reason, and really look into the root of the community to help us out and help us get out of this.
Great, thank you. My last question is about residential versus commercial parking on Capitol Hill, but really in all of the neighborhoods in DC. It's a flashpoint. How do you balance parking among residents, customers, employees, and business owners? Where parking is in high demand, oftentimes employees or employers end up having to absorb parking tickets as part of the cost of doing business, as part of the cost of going to your shift. How would you approach this problem, and how would you deal with it?
Yeah, so I'm an urban planner, and parking is a big thing for me. I don't, the reason why I focus on equitable development is because it's the response to smart growth development, which is very transit oriented, right? But it's also myopic in that mindset, right? It doesn't account for families, it doesn't account for older people, it doesn't account for people who may have health conditions that they can't necessarily ride a bike and do all of their groceries, right? in that one bike, or order somewhere to be delivered to their home, right? So I have done so much work around making sure that traffic tickets, parking tickets are done equitably and are enforced equitably. We have introduced 3 bills on the Councilmember Trey and White, and they were all combined into one, and it was to provide an amnesty. When you actually start asking the people, it's exactly what you mentioned, who are getting these tickets. It's not because they're bad drivers. I was getting a lot of those tickets, and I'm not a bad driver. I only have 1 car, and I share it with the entire community. But it's because we're doing commercial. We're going to dropping off our kids to daycare. That's a business. Then you're going to Trader Joe's and trying to find parking there, and that's impossible. And then in other areas, they're completely reducing them. So I would actually go in and put a halt in some of this reduction of parking, because especially in commercial areas. Then also include, for example, we did a project. It was a community benefit agreement for a proposed project. It's the first TIF in 8. And one of the things that we included in the community agreement with the commercial entity is to include lower rate parking for the community, right? And then people would know that they have spaces that you can go and park and that are available for you, that specifically for people in the river, right? And you would know, businesses know that, because you build your clientele, right? It's not a transient clientele. You know, it's especially if it's groceries, if it's food, because you're always going to buy those things. So we included that in the community-based agreement, and it was approved. So I want to expand that. I want to be able to have that for all of these projects that are being proposed, and also make sure that we can do that at the ANC level. I'm an ANC currently, and we can advocate for those community agreements with the establishments. In Fort Totten right now, we have issues with that. There's going to be new development coming in. What are we going to do with parking? It's going to take parking from the resident area. So I have the plan. I've done the work. That particular project of Union Square is a really good example. So now the time is to expand it. And yeah.
Great, thank you.
Great. All righty. So at this point in time, we come to the last question. And sorry, I'm trying to get fancy here with a little bit of different motion on Zoom. I'm still learning. The last question is, what would you name the regional football team, and do you support a return to RFK Stadium?
So I figured I'm going to answer it in a fun way. So back in 2009, I was working for an international architecture firm. Mm-hmm. And what we were giving a project, and the project was, and this was only internal for all the staff, we would do like design competitions amongst each other. And the design competition was like, reimagine RFK. Right? And what would you do with the building? Because some of us actually think the building is really cool. It's a brutalist building. My husband loves the building because he's a brutalist guy. He likes concrete. So it was really cool because notice I said an international firm. So we actually had people from China saying designs. And what they imagined with RFK was a Disneyland. So a whole, like literally it was like they had, Donald Duck up there, and then it was just really interesting. It was like all these really innovative things. I partnered up with the graphic designer in my team, which is a really cool guy. And what we did is we turned it into a food depot, a food enterprise, so that you could have market spaces, and you'd still have the field. And that would be used by a lot of the schools that don't have access to fields, and like all of these like sports that you could do. Right? So still have that in place, but really reuse the building in a different way.
Oh, that's lovely.
Yeah, it was pretty cool.
It's so much nicer. But so then, what about the Washington football team?
Exactly. So that's the key. It was all based around the idea that they would no longer be here, right? This was also around the time where the ballpark stadium was being built, right? So it was the idea that they would go to another site where they would be able to build a whole brand new stadium for them, and hopefully a more sustainable stadium, right? Because having I grew up in Bolivia, really close to the stadium. So and currently I live near Catholic University Stadium, right? And I appreciate it. Like I have those memories of game time and having people walk around and going to the game. So I think it's really cool to have a stadium in the city. Now, what would we name it? Definitely not what is named right. What was named before. That is something that I cannot condone. But yeah, like I do think that we should have some type of field for sports. Maybe it doesn't have to be the stadium itself. It could be another venue from maybe their training areas here, so that students and youth can also participate. Their presence would be here in that sort of way, but definitely not funded by government work. It should not be funded. It should not be publicly funded. A lot of my husband is a big football fan. He tells me all of the stadiums, they're not getting public funding. They're private. They're funding the stadiums. They're on their own, so they can do it. There's no need for us to be funding it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me and to Julie, and it was really nice talking to you. If people want to learn more about you and your campaign, where can they go?
Yes, so on social media, you can find me anywhere on Facebook. I'm on Facebook a lot, so it's at Claudia for DC, and my website is www.claudiafordc.com.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thanks again.
All right, thank you again. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Goodbye.